okay, not only is this just going to help me with a circular economy, this is a new way for us to bring money into the country, bring it out of the country, and also use it digitally between the entire country, not just in a small beach town. And that's when I realized, okay, this is the real value that Bitcoin brings. It brings 21st century finance to everywhere in the world that traditional banks can't reach, and everybody in the world that can't access a traditional bank via the traditional means.
What is going on, everybody? Frank here, back with an amazing guest, someone I'm really excited to have on the podcast because I fear that he has done far too few podcasts in the Bitcoin space, or far too few podcasts in general, because he has such an incredible story, such an interesting guy, such a kind-hearted individual who does really, really important work with Bitcoin in the Caribbean, in his home country, Jamaica. Dread is our guest today. Super excited to talk with him. I had the pleasure of seeing him later last year. And I know he's been quite busy helping with the relief effort in Jamaica. So we're all going to get into that. We're going to dive right in there. But first, Dread, if you want to just give a bit of an introduction about yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, Frank, thank you for having me on the podcast. And for those who don't know me, I am Dread. I am the Jamaican Bitcoiner. I say that. No, there's other Jamaican Bitcoiners, but I've been around for a while, so I like to call myself that. I've also been just a classical developer for a while, so that's kind of my reason for having passion around Bitcoin. And then from there, I've just been building out Bitcoin for my country and for my region. There's a lot to go into there, but I won't really unpack it in my intro. I'll just let you know that if you're looking for a Jamaican person to tell you about Bitcoin, that's who I am.
Yeah. And he's also developed a very cool app that we'll get into, Flash. We'll talk about that and also the role that it has played in the relief effort. But let's dive right in. You've had your head down doing incredibly important work, working with teams on the ground in Jamaica, helping to deliver relief to people on the ground who were impacted by the hurricane, which has happened months ago at this point. But these relief efforts take a long time. This was briefly touched upon in the news cycle, but since then we've seen all sorts of stuff happening in Iran, in Venezuela. We were talking a little bit off camera. You've actually talked about how some of what's happening in Venezuela has actually impacted the relief effort in Jamaica. But let's start high level. What happened in Jamaica? What role did you end up playing? And how did Flash help out with all this?
For those who don't know, the hurricane that hit the Caribbean and Jamaica first was quite literally a Category 6 hurricane. Now, granted, there is no such thing as a Category 6 hurricane, but it was the highest Category 5 hurricane on record in the region and in this century. And not only did it hit Jamaica, but it did something weird. It didn't just hit Jamaica from the east, it hit Jamaica from the west, which almost never happens with hurricanes. It almost did a loop and hit Jamaica from the west. So the west has never really had that kind of strength make landfall. It made a disaster zone of the west of the island. So from that point, we kind of jumped into gear and reached out to the Bitcoin community asking for contributions for the relief effort. And within days, we got over $10,000. We ended up getting over $15,000 total from 164 different people from the Bitcoin community. So thank you all. And we were able to immediately put those funds to use, creating care packages, whether it was actual food or medical supplies or, underwear, feminine products, whatever the people needed. We would create these products for them so they could get food and health and safety immediately. And how do we do it? Well, there are merchants in Jamaica that use Flash, which we'll talk about, and they were able to accept Bitcoin and provide food. This was able to skip the banks because the banks weren't working. This was able to skip Western Union because Western Union was closed or completely destroyed. The building was destroyed, but people were still able to get their food through Bitcoin. So that was an amazing quick win. And then the long-term win was because we got so much money, we were able to start purchasing bigger things like solar panels and solar generators and batteries that we could ship down to Jamaica. So people not only could get that food and supplies, but now in the community centers where they didn't have internet and they didn't have power, they were able to have a generator now and a Starlink. But the issue with that, which we'll get into, is that it took a long time to ship those things to Jamaica because, as you guys know, in the Caribbean, there's a lot of things happening right now that might delay boats.
Let's dive in there. I couldn't believe this when you said it to me. I was facetiously saying like so much has happened since, well, it seriously has happened, but I was facetiously saying like the news cycle has sort of forgotten about what happened in Jamaica. And you actually said that some of what happened in Venezuela, one of the stories that's obviously sort of happened since, ended up having an impact on the ability to get supplies there. So could you get into some of those details?
Yeah, so as you know, with the intervention that happened in Venezuela, the entire Caribbean region had a lot of American military presence in the marine areas. So a lot of warships, a lot of airspace being blocked off, and the usual, traditional logistics that would happen across the region was completely slowed down by these military actions. So what happens? Ships that need to get in with a lot of resources for Jamaican relief efforts got delayed by months. We had, generators that needed to come in and they were supposed to land in January. It's March and they're just getting here, mainly because of, like I said, a lot of the delays happening from those military actions. Now, I don't think there's anything that's happened in terms of, things getting canceled or things getting broken or destroyed. But, a lot of people that are waiting for relief now are waiting additional months because all of these stories are crossing together, right? The capture of Maduro and the actual intervention happening in Venezuela is affecting not just Jamaica, but a lot of other countries in the region that are trying to get supplies as well. So we're getting them. They're happening, but they're just happening a lot slower.
Okay. And in terms of that initial few weeks, what was it like just from your shoes? What was it like? What were you hearing from people on the ground? What was the reality post the hurricane? I'm sure people can kind of imagine it, but I'm also sure there are certain things that you had to experience and help people with that people probably couldn't even imagine.
I think the hardest thing for me, it was to see people that usually would be living a middle class to even upper class life in Jamaica, right? They have their two children and their dog and their white picket fence in like a nice area like Mandeville, Jamaica. And then after the hurricane, those are people that were immediately homeless. And not only homeless, but because Jamaica didn't have the type of resources a first world country would have, like, the immediate Red Cross or tents and stuff, the people would be sleeping on the floor, waiting for help. So a lot of community members were the ones that stepped up immediately and took stuff out of their homes to bring to them. And that is what really touched me. It was like I saw the people of Jamaica step out and help their neighbor and help their, countryman before the actual government or the actual relief effort organizations, even foreign ones, could get to the country in time to provide that help. So that was touching. The other part was a little bit darker, which was the desperation of people. When you are homeless and you have no food and you don't know where it's going to come from, and the nearest city with resources is miles and miles away, violence tend to occur. So there was a little bit of violence happening on the road when people would try to bring relief supplies to the parts that were affected. They would get stopped and robbed along the way. And I mean, you might expect some of that to happen, but it was happening at an alarming rate to the point where the police actually stepped in and started making checkpoints along the way and putting up military posts to make sure that the community centers that were providing relief to people were protected. And those kind of things kind of give you a stark reality check to say, this is not just a disaster zone. This is also a danger zone now, because people don't have the protection they're used to and they're not used to just living on the street. So those were, I think, the two main things that kind of shook me, to make me realize this is real life. And it made me take things a lot seriously and try to move as fast as I can because I knew that every day that we had a delay was another day that someone would be probably going home without food or going home without clean clothes or going home to an unsafe environment.
That's a lot to take on. And for context here, how big of a team were you working with and how quickly were you able to mobilize this team? Is it part of your normal team that works on Flash and maybe Flash adoption in Jamaica, or was it a broader network of people that you tapped into?
Both. So we a portion of my team from Flash just immediately jumped into action and we were helping. But then it was a really beautiful decentralized way that it worked where many different smaller communities and organizations banded together. So there is DJ Amber who works for Irie FM. She has her own organization. There was Buds and Brushes, Mel who runs an organization that does it already does food for the poor and it does women's shelters that she's been running for a long time. A lot of these organizations came together to form almost a convoy that would go with buses and food every week over to the disaster area and help out. So I was lucky enough not to have to create the whole team myself. I just volunteered me and my few people to that larger group, and then that larger group was able to organize it. I mean, it was a beautiful moment of, organic coming together without needing a top-down, institution to help it happen. And to this day, it's still happening. Like I think we have in next weekend another bus going out there with supplies and I think one of our shipments just cleared, so we'll have new supplies coming from Flash from the donations that'll be getting there this weekend too.
Amazing. In terms of expediency, so banks were impacted by this. So I think some of it was literally just infrastructure was impacted in a way where not only could government not react as much, but literally the financial infrastructure that you might normally use to move funds around and to get aid to people wasn't functioning because of the damage from the hurricane. So Bitcoin becomes this thing that you can use through Flash to more quickly, again, move funds to wherever they need to be to purchase whatever you need to purchase. And also with Flash, because it also has an on and an off ramp feature, there it has a connection to the traditional system. I think that was part of the equation in terms of because it's not like everyone overnight is going to become Bitcoiners just because they're in a disaster zone and they're going to understand how to use it and all that. So there was a lot that had to happen very quickly, but luckily because of the nature of what Bitcoin is and the fact that its infrastructure wasn't necessarily drastically impacted by what happened in Jamaica. It was something that was very usable for people. Can you talk a little bit about some of the particulars and what it was like to sort of kick Flash into action and maybe even get some people using it that might not be familiar with this technology?
Yeah, that happened almost instantly because, like you said, the banks were just not working. And you'd think, okay, well, why wouldn't the banks work if, there are probably banks in the safe part of the country, the east side, that still had their servers up and running and branches were open. Well, the problem is that, even though those branches were open, for some reason, the network, the bank network, the Visa network, the MasterCard rails just wouldn't work. So even if you happen to have internet access or power in a place that was affected, the Visa card just wouldn't swipe, right? It wouldn't work at all for the client. So for the merchant. So the merchant was either saying, give me cash, right? Or I can't sell you anything, unfortunately, because they wouldn't do IOUs or credit. And that's kind of where we went into some merchants and were able to tell them, okay, well, this is your first time using Flash, so maybe we can sign you up, you can collect it, we can show you how it works. Some merchants did that. Others didn't. Others had to get the cash directly. And then we would do peer-to-peer. And Jamaica has a decent Bitcoin community happening where we were able to do peer-to-peer and give the person Bitcoin, get the cash, give it to the merchant, and get the food immediately. So both of those worked. But from the bank side, we realized that people who were not able to use their banking services and didn't have Flash set up yet, some of them already were accepting Bitcoin. And we didn't know this. Like if you go to btcmap.org, there's a lot more merchants in Jamaica and in the Caribbean than even Flash has been setting up. So we've realized now that we've been building upon this collaborative network, not competitive network, where even though we build up our own Flash merchants, there are other merchants out there collecting Bitcoin, collecting stable coins, collecting Lightning that you can go and pay with Flash. And that just expanded the network for us quickly without us even knowing, because it was a necessity to find out if they would accept the Bitcoin or not. So I guess a silver lining in a dark area, in a dark moment. But from that point, we realized that every merchant that we spoke to, they were open to accepting something different because they realized for themselves that anything can happen to stop them from being able to collect their rent or collect their revenue going forward. And they wanted to know how they can make a more resilient, method of payment that was available to them. And we've actually now created an initiative to continue creating this resilient flow of payments. So it's not just about Bitcoin, it's about Bitcoin in a place that can have uncensorable communications, renewable sources of energy, whether it's solar generators, etc., mesh networking, where people can have even the basic internet available to them for, emergency services and payments. And we're going to keep on building that out in Jamaica as we go forward.
That's amazing. So I just, as you said this, I was reminded people were using things like Bitchat, right? You spoke about a mesh network. So Bitchat,
Yeah.
Yeah, that works over Bluetooth. You don't necessarily need internet connection. So actually, I'm going to ask two questions there at the same time. You talked about these financial networks being impacted, but did the mobile networks and did internet, did these networks, I mean, I'm imagining they had to have been severely impacted as well. So did mesh networks become even more of a thing in that moment?
So I'll send you a picture after the podcast so you can see exactly how bad it was. It's a bird's eye view. The place was flattened. So what does that mean is light poles are gone, towers are gone, cell towers are gone. If you're not using satellite connection, you're not getting internet, and you don't have power. You don't have cell phone service. So everything was gone. Like you're if you even if you had a cell phone with full battery, you couldn't connect to any tower, so it wouldn't work for you at all. And Bitchat ended up being the number two downloaded app in the country, in the region during right after the hurricane, and people were using it for a long time until power started getting restored and until cell phone service was back up. I would say that the cell phone companies, Digicel and Flow, within maybe 2 weeks had some emergency towers back up. But during those 2 weeks, Bitchat was the most used app for sure.
Wow. So the average person, the super, just the average person, how did this news spread so quickly? I mean, BitChat, it's okay, it's a thing amongst sort of Bitcoiners and stuff, but how did the average person end up hearing about this?
I have no idea. I'm not gonna lie. I have no clue. Like somebody downloaded it and shared it with friends. If you went into the regional chats where you could see people talking, they were all just testing it out. And I could see the Jamaican patois, like, does this thing work? Oh, and they're just like figuring it out together. No Bitcoiners were involved with
Wow.
that I saw talking. But as soon as it spiked, it went right back down again. It's like it was a very quick moment of emergency, and then once people used it and got what they needed, they were back off. So it's a very ephemeral usage of the tool, but I think that's exactly what it's made for. I think BitChat is made for those moments when you need it, and then you
Yep.
go back to normal right afterwards.
Yeah. It's like emergency tech almost, like a new sort of tech, new name for the sort of technology we're building here. Um, generally
Like it,
speaking,
emergency tab.
yeah. Generally speaking, now, how are things there? How much has the island recovered? You were telling me a little bit off camera. You had a lot of people move from this western part of the island. They're living in a different part of the island now. What sorts of shifts or changes does that occur long term? What does that look like long term? Just generally speaking, what's the state of things at this point in time?
I would probably refer to it as displacement versus moving because, they weren't they didn't want to move. But because of that, there's probably been a little bit of strain on the city of Kingston and other eastern cities. But, Jamaicans are very, very friendly, very neighborly people. We are all about one love, and out of many, one people is our motto for the country. So when you see somebody in need, even though we might come off as rough sometimes, when we see somebody in need, they're always going to get help. So, that happened. And along with, we were bountiful in terms of fruit and food there. So even though it's rough going, we're a poor country. I think once people were able to make their way over to the east of the island, it was a little bit better. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say it's sunshine and rainbows. We still have our problems, but a lot of that migration happened and people were taken care of. However, not everyone can migrate. So there's still a lot of people in the west of the island that are still suffering to this day. There's still a lot of aid that is coming down that hasn't been efficiently deployed, and they're still working on making that happen to this day. And then there's still a lot of, shipments that are stuck that are still waiting to be cleared to this day. So it's still a long process. I think that we're out of the danger zone in terms of worrying about, mass casualties or anybody, really dying from this anymore. But there's a lot of work to do. I would assume it would take another 2 to 3 years before we look at a full recovery of the island and hopefully a improvement, in terms of disaster preparedness.
Okay. And also maybe potentially infrastructure as well. But there's something else that kind of comes to mind as you're saying all this. We spoke a little bit as this was going on. I interviewed you for a piece I wrote on the work that you were doing. And you also said, Jamaica, this happens every season, every hurricane season or different, at certain points in the year. Are certain things potentially different now, whether it's maybe some of the infrastructure that's being built, emergency readiness, whatever that is, even people being able to rely on something like Bitcoin a little bit more? What feels like it has sort of changed for the next time something like this happens?
So first I'll say that Jamaica is usually very lucky during the hurricane season. The hurricanes come through and they might hit Haiti, they might hit, Haiti, they might hit Dominican Republic, they might hit Cuba, but they 75% of the time they circle Jamaica and don't really hit us. So this happening is probably one in 3 or 1 in 4 or 5 year occurrence. It might start happening sooner, as we know that climate has been changing in general. But what I've seen that has changed so far is more the technology around the recovery, right? Like before, we didn't have as many emergency beacons set up, emergency systems set up. This time around, they had almost immediately emergency reporting system, like with a map where you could really just point out where people need help, and emergency services would be able to get there within a reasonable amount of time for Jamaica. So I think I've seen that setup like spun up on the spot here, and a lot of things like that are giving me hope that by the next hurricane we're gonna have a lot more quicker response time to areas in the country that were previously unreachable. So I'm really happy that this has allowed the country to kind of see where the weak points are, and then have quick response teams that are ready to go to those areas during the next hurricane. That's like the most important thing, is saving lives, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a lot was learned from this, and a lot of in terms of preparedness and responsiveness to this stuff. So I'm happy to hear that at least this seems like a silver lining or something good to come out of all of it. That's really, really inspiring to hear. In terms of people using Flash, I want to start with a little bit of an overview of it. Super cool wallet. Fork of, I think, is Bitcoin Beach wallet, which is now Blink, but has all these other features like the on and the off ramp to the traditional structure. I think you ended up employing the Breeze SDK. I think it also has something similar to StableSats. So I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about the wallet and then how people ended up using it. Or I mean, did they quickly learn how to use Lightning? Was it relatively easy for them? Were they using the base chain? Well, essentially, when people picked it up and had to learn it, within minutes, what was their go-to?
Yeah, great questions. And I'll start out by kind of narrowing it down to just the very, very basic part of the wallet, which is when you just download it for the first time, all you see is a USD or JMD balance. That's it. You don't really know anything about stable coins yet, or Lightning Network, or Bitcoin, or anything like that. It's just Flash, and you can use it to pay for stuff. And that's how we present it to people in Jamaica, because people in Jamaica don't have PayPal or Cash App or Venmo or Zelle. They know about these things from the US, but the average Jamaican that doesn't have access to the US doesn't have any fintech app on their phone, per se. They might have a beta version, sorry, not beta, a new version of Link, which is kind of the CBDC type wallet that Jamaica has implemented, and that's a whole different conversation we can get into. But most people don't have it. It was only 2% adoption. So most people don't have a fintech app on their phone. So a Flash is usually the first touch for a fintech app, and we made it as simple as possible. You press start, you see the USD wallet, or if you switched current currencies, it's the JMD wallet, and then you can just go to a store and spend, or you can top it up from your bank account, and that's it. Like very, very MVP version. Now, to your point, there's a lot of things in the settings, right? So if the techie ones, or the really Bitcoiners that are hiding in Jamaica and don't want to, come on podcasts like me, they would open up the wallet and they would see, oh, advanced mode. And then you can turn on the Bitcoin side of the wallet, which, to your point, we integrated Breeze SDK to do that. So it provides you with a non-custodial wallet that you get your 12 words for your seed phrase, you write it down, and you can switch between each wallet, your USD wallet and your Bitcoin wallet, back and forth, depending on where you want to hold your funds. I consider it to be like a checkings and a savings account. And then you can, off ramp into your hardware wallet if you want to, because it does on chain as well. And then the exciting part for me is that because we're a community type of culture, people always want to chat and commerce and do all their little peer-to-peer, fun, trading, etc. And we created Noster as a button as a tab in the wallet that allows people to chat with their fellow merchants, chat with each other, send zaps, just like you do on Noster. And also, we'll be integrating the P2P trade version of Noster. So it's like a NIP 69, where you can just post stuff. And it doesn't have to be you're posting Bitcoin. I know Bitcoiners love to post Bitcoin, but I could post a table for sale. Like, I could post my monitor or my Xbox. And that P2P trade thing will be inside the app where you can zap people to get what they want from them and then collect however you want. So we're very excited about the social aspect of it, the simplicity of it, and then it still gives them the sovereignty of having a non-custodial wallet in there too.
It's amazing. And how dare you bring non-Bitcoin propagandists to Noster? How dare you bring normal people that can use this for normal things? It's so crazy of you. I want to dive into I want to dive into a little bit of your making the app because I think it's a really cool story, and I don't do too much kind of Bitcoin story stuff here, but I think this is really important because of your intention in making it. I think your educational background is great for people to understand as well. But there was just really this earnest motivation for you to create something that would really be this amazing financial services / money app for people in Jamaica, especially given that complete void that existed before you brought Flash to people. So if you want to go as far back as you're comfortable, but maybe just a little bit of background on how and why you created Flash.
Yeah, sure. So I saw a podcast actually about El Salvador. And when I first saw it, I realized, okay, El Salvador's doing something really cool with Bitcoin. I was already buying Bitcoin and I was, following the technological side of it really as a coder, as a developer. But then I saw that a country in my region, El Salvador, was using Bitcoin in this small little beach town, and I wanted to see what it was all about and how it was working for them because I saw people that I could relate to using it, not, a techie or an investor. So I contacted Mike Peterson, who I saw on the podcast, and I just DM'd him on Twitter and said, "Hey, can I come down and check it out?" And Mike was like, "Sure, come down whenever." I'm like, "All right, I'm coming Thursday." He said, "Wait, this Thursday?" So I showed up, found the most recognizable hotel I could find because I didn't know anything about El Salvador. And
Mm.
from your history, reading about El Salvador, you know it traditionally was a very dangerous place to go to. So I tried to find a safe hotel, checked in, and randomly, as I walked into the hotel, there was a huge table with this massive fish in the middle of the table. And around the table was sitting where people I recognized from Twitter. It was like, Jack Mallers, Peter McCormick, Miles Suter, a couple, reporters. Mike Peterson was there, Jorge and Ramon, if you know about the Bitcoin speech story, and a couple other people just there kind of almost brainstorming on El Salvador and what was going on there. And I just walked up to them and did a bold move that changed the trajectory of the rest of my life, saying, "Hey guys, I'm Dred from Jamaica. I'm a Bitcoiner. Can I join you?" And they said yes. So from that point forward, I learned a lot about what was going on in El Salvador almost directly, and then was able to volunteer immediately to help them build it out. So I stayed there for another couple of weeks. I helped to onboard people that were just learning about Bitcoin, half Spanish, half English. My Spanish is terrible, but I was able to show them how to move money on the Blink wallet. I learned a lot just how to adopt and how to, create a circular economy from these guys. And then I took all that knowledge and went back to Jamaica and started building. At first, I thought I would be building just a circular economy, right? I would go do the same thing, onboard merchants. But then that didn't happen because we don't have Blink in Jamaica. We don't have a ATM that you can use to, move from cash to Bitcoin. So the rails just weren't there in Jamaica that we had in El Salvador. And I'd go back to El Salvador every couple week, no, not months, every year I'd go back to El Salvador. Every year I'm back to El Salvador and checked it out and saw how they were progressing. This right around the time, Bukele started picking up steam and they created the Chivo wallet and they had the uh, the Bitcoin law, all that happened while I was trying to make this happen in Jamaica. And I turned around and I said, okay, I realize what the gap is. It's that we don't have a Blink or a Bitcoin beach wallet in Jamaica, so I'm going to build Flash. And then as I built Flash, I realized that, okay, not only is this just going to help me with a circular economy, this is a new way for us to bring money into the country, bring it out of the country, and also use it digitally between the entire country, not just in a small beach town. And that's when I realized, okay, this is the real value that Bitcoin brings. It brings 21st century finance to everywhere in the world that traditional banks can't reach, and everybody in the world that can't access a traditional bank via the traditional means. So I'm really happy to be continuing that mission, and I hope I'm making the El Zante guys proud. I'm standing on their shoulders because those guys are giants.
I have no doubt that you're making them proud. No question about that. One thing I wanted to touch on, though, we talked a little bit about this last time we spoke, was the amount of people that just in Jamaica who have a bank account or who don't have a bank account. So having a bank account is kind of difficult for, I think, a few reasons, as you've mentioned. But if you wanted to maybe touch on that to help contextualize why something like Flash is so important.
Yeah, so a lot of people will look at the statistics and say that, oh, well, 75 to 80% of people in Jamaica have bank accounts. The number might be somewhere around 77. But if you look at how many of those people are economically using those bank accounts, the number drops to almost 40%, 30 something percent are people that are actually using their bank accounts. Why? Because compared to the salary and the expenses and things you buy in Jamaica, the fees to use a bank account can be prohibitive for many people, right? If you're getting a certain pay and you deposit it, and by the time you deposit it and take it out to buy food, you've lost 10 to 15% of your monthly wages. You're probably not going to put it in the bank, right? Or if it goes to the bank via pay, you're probably going to pull it all out and keep it so you don't have to pay a transaction fee every time you want to spend your money. So it's that small level of margin that causes people not to want to use banks. And I think there's a space there. I know there's a space there for digital currency in general, because now with Flash, you can do Flash to Flash for free. So people can do transactions without having to stash the money under their bed, right? Or keep it safe from criminals that know they just pulled out their entire monthly check at the ATM. So we're solving two problems. It's one, giving them digital access, and two, keeping them safe if they really want to have their money, to spend without people knowing. And I think there's also another misnomer, which is that, because Jamaica is a cash rich country, or not cash rich, a cash first country, that cash is king, that we don't have the technology there. And that's why. And that's not true. Jamaica has a technology. Like, we're a very technology first country. We're actually very progressive in terms of the Caribbean islands and the technology that we have. We were one of the first countries in the region to launch and roll out a CBDC, which is a central bank digital currency that people could use. The banks could use it and people could use it. So I know that the people have the capability and the capacity and the incentive to use technology. I think we just haven't had the right technology in their hands yet for them to use it properly.
Amazing. And you've given them that. And speaking of that technology, one of the things that I really love about it is that on a certain level with the Bitcoin Beach store, you kind of, I don't know, soft forked the idea of the circular economy and brought it to Jamaica. But on the other side of things, you actually did fork the Bitcoin Beach wallet, now the Blink wallet, as the sort of as the foundation layer. I think that's a fair way to put it of Flash. So I think that this stuff is really interesting for people to note, because it's not like Bitcoin development happens in a vacuum. It's obviously the nature of open source tech that it doesn't. We can all see what everybody else is building because it's open source. But I think it's really important to highlight this point of, you went to El Salvador, you saw how people were using this wallet. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm assuming maybe you thought, oh, this seems like a really good onboarding mechanism. This is a good place for people to start. I've used Blink. I think it's a great wallet. I know people are critical sometimes. It's custodial or whatever like that. You've made some changes. People can use the Blink SDK. Can you talk a little bit about that, though? Having that Galloy stack, the Blink stack to start building with, or the Bitcoin Beach, the wallet to fork and start building with. Did it did it give you some confidence? Did it take some of the cognitive burden of creating the app off of you? What was that process like?
Yeah, without that, the kind of foundation to start with, I probably would have spent another 2 years building it from scratch. Like, it was a big accelerator. Not only did they already find out what worked in the market, like in the wild, and they were able to, get that real feedback, but also the open source nature of it allowed a lot of other Bitcoiners from around the world to contribute to the code, and provide reviews, provide improvements. So it wasn't, it was twofold. It was the on-the-ground experience that gave real-time feedback to create UX and UI improvements, and then the Bitcoin community and the open source community providing security updates and audits and improvements to the code to provide like world-class code, even though it was kind of, all over the place because it was many people contributing, but that's the way open source works. If you look at, Linux or any other open source project, it starts off, all over the place, and then it creates this coalescence of a, really strong product that everybody wants to use. And that's what happened with the Blink wallet. I think that it's gone productized now, as Blink has its own thing apart from Galloy, which is still open source. Blink is still open source too, but Galloy was the foundation. And we have also forked so far away from them. Like, as you know, we've kind of put a scalpel to it and made a lot of improvements. And the most important thing we did is we made UX improvements that were much more focused on the Caribbean communities and the, both English speaking and Spanish speaking and Dutch speaking Caribbean communities that have their own culture, their own flair for things, their own words that they kind of recognize and ways that things work. We really focused on that to make sure that people felt like this was a product they could be proud of. It wasn't just a random product that was coming from another country. And then on top of that, we were able to use our relationships in Jamaica to make sure that people can on-ramp and off-ramp, either at agents or through their banking system, and Blink couldn't provide that directly. Maybe we could have still gone through them and had partnerships with them, but that kind of ownership and that cultural ownership was very important because people are skeptical. People are very skeptical of the digital currency and cryptocurrency industry in general. So if it wasn't coming from someone that they could point to and say, you built this, then adoption would have been much harder. So it was very helpful to have the Blink as a start. And then putting the Caribbean Jamaican face on it was really the accelerator that made it all work together. The security in the beginning, the time tested proof in El Salvador, and then the One Love Jamaican face on top to make it work.
I love this, and something that's coming to mind as you're saying it. One of the things, I used to be a writing professor, and I would tell my students like more details, more details. I want to know like exactly what you're talking about here. So one of the things I want to know, like, how did you Jamaicafy the app? What are some things that are sort of a signal to the people that are using it? This was made by a Jamaican.
So if you go on the website getflash.io, you'll realize it immediately has all the Jamaican colors. The background is a skyline of Kingston, so people recognize our downtown pier and the buildings there. But then when you go into the app, like you download it and you onboard to the app, the first thing the app asks you when you press start is, "What's your name?" And in front of that is our national bird. It's a Dr. Bird, we call it, which is a type of hummingbird that Jamaicans know very well. But it's like almost metallic, futuristic cyberpunk type of hummingbird, and that is our mascot. So from the beginning, you're just getting inundated with just Jamaica, 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 and the Caribbean at large. And then from there, everywhere you look in the app, we try to put a little, style, whether it's maybe a different word you'd use for an action that might be patois, or a different color or a different form. And it's just really, really cool that way. And we also have all of the currencies of the Caribbean and languages of the Caribbean as well. So you can change your language, you can change your currency to match your culture.
Amazing. Speaking of currencies, one of the things too, how much are people using Jamaican dollars versus US dollars, and then now potentially even Bitcoin? Are they currently thinking about Bitcoin as more of a savings asset? Are they using it as money? Are they using US dollars within the app? What tends to be their go-to as far as like day-to-day spending money when using the app?
It's shifted over time, actually. I would say last year when we were in our pilot phase, it was almost exclusively US or Jamaican dollars. And I want to make a point of clarification. We are just like the Blink app, where the base currency on the dollar side, on the stablecoin side, is US dollars, but you can show your display currency differently. So even though you're holding US dollars, it'll show you the Jamaican equivalent, right? But then if the exchange rate changes, you might see a up or down shifting by pennies of the forex between US and Jamaican dollars. So that's a point of clarification. The majority of people last year were using just the USD side. They just wanted to hold dollars in their hand. It was cool that it came through Bitcoin or Lightning, but they were like, let me just hold the dollars and see what it's like. As of December, January, February, that started to shift. People have gotten a drastic increase in curiosity, I would say, in the Bitcoin and stablecoin space, and they want to see how it works. So a lot of people are now opening up the wallet, turning on the Bitcoin side and purchasing, like topping up Bitcoin, whether it's from their own, exchange that they know of, or they can top up straight from sorry, top up straight from the Flash wallet and then move money back and forth between their savings and their checking. And that's happening a lot more now, we've realized. Breeze has been a great partner, I have to say. Like, as we grow with them, the non-custodial wallet SDK just gets faster and cheaper and easier to use. And I'm really happy that we're able to build with them and see what else they come up with, because as they create more functionality in their app, our app Flash immediately gets that functionality that people can use. And we hope that that kind of growth will continue, and that Jamaicans will eventually have the same parity of usability in all the apps that they use, because Breeze is like an SDK for all apps, right? Not just for Flash.
Yep. Yeah, the Breeze team, they just do not stop. And it's not even a huge team. They just continue to ship and to improve and to iterate it. They're truly an amazing group of people. Danny and Umi are here in New York, and I see Roy quite frequently. So shout out to that team. And I love that you're working with them.
Out.
Yeah. You mentioned this a little bit earlier about the messiness of open source development, and then this compliment you just paid to the Breeze team, but this idea of working all together with people, sometimes there's pros and cons to that. You're classically trained. You went to school, I think, for computer engineering, or computer science, whichever. Yeah. So you have this formal college education. In doing things a certain way. You have a background, I think, working within more traditional structures, more traditional companies. I'm kind of curious as to, I guess, emotionally what it's like to go through, well, I mean, technically as well, to go through building an open source app, working within this open source culture. Are there moments where it's frustrating, where you just wish it could be a little bit more streamlined, that you're making the final decision and you're just pushing forward with it? Or has it been far more, I don't want to be too dramatic, but has there been more pros than cons in this process of having to work with other people in open source culture?
Yeah, I would say it's been a journey overall. To your point, I've been a classically trained engineer and went to becoming a process engineer and a management consultant, and worked, in much more structured formats, right? You start a project and you kind of have all your resources and your ducks lined up. The open source community is very different. I didn't come into it actually trying to work in the beginning. I came into it as, a student, learning everything about FOSS, and not just that, everything about Bitcoin at the same time. So I would say I ended up with a 3 to 4 year, degree in just learning about how open source coding it happens and how it's different. And then from that point forward, I was able to start building smaller projects on my own, like contributing to projects that were already on the way. I did a long stint with, if you know the guys from Start9 Labs, and they create, if you guys don't know them, they create sovereign computing, which is basically your own server that you can run in your own home, and you can run your own node on it, and you can also run anything else you want on it instead of the cloud. So you can check it out, start9.com. And I started working with them for a while and got my chops under me for open source coding, like figuring out how to contribute to things, figuring out ethics behind open source contributions and licensing. And that really got me interested in the whole world of it, because I had not done that before in corporate America. In corporate America, it was about IP and it's about speed to market and, protecting your capital, your code. And it was just a completely different world. So that took a little bit to adapt to, but once I did, there's no going back. You realize that everything you write at this point, everything you produce as a coder, this is kind of what the cypherpunks were saying when cypherpunks write code, is that what you're writing is going to benefit the world in some way once it's productive. You're not just benefiting your pockets or one, segment. You're opening it up to the world, and whoever wants to use it can use it. And there's kind of a sense of, I don't know, zen there, writing like that. I think a lot of coders and programmers and engineers in general that do open source products are operating at a higher vibration is the best way I would put it. They're operating at a higher vibration. They're doing it for a good cause. And therefore, a lot of the greed that you might see just doesn't exist as much. There's still some, of course, we're human, but there's a lot lower, proportion of it. And I think I like living in that space. I like working in that space. And that's the reason why everything we do at Flash is open source. Of course, we can't open source the PII and the bank account numbers and the way we do our trades, but we open source everything in terms of code, and everything that we build, we hope that other people use it. to either create products like ours, products comparative to ours, complementary to ours, or collaborative to ours.
Amazing. I do agree that people are operating at a different vibration. And I mentioned earlier just how kind of a soul you are, and I can't highlight that point enough. So if you ever get a chance to meet Dread here, please introduce yourself to him and absorb some of that, some of that good energy. On that notion of, um, creating something for a higher purpose, what is your greatest hope for Jamaica with what you're creating? So obviously, you've now created a tool that can be used in emergencies, can be used to foster some sense of financial inclusion. But in terms of like maybe even a borderline utopian vision, what does Flash do for Jamaica?
Oh, wow. I love these kind of, cosmic questions. I think that, a lot of people in Jamaica are they're very hopeful, very hardworking, right? We are probably some of the hardest working people in the world. That's why we're so talented in general. Um, Probably something to do with the food too, the yams. But I think that, the people that have that potential in Jamaica are going to start being able to realize they can use it, you know?
Mm.
And of course, this is not every other show talks about AI, so I won't go into AI too much on this, but AI has an acceleration effect, right? And you have people that are able to use something like AI and use something that they can fully control their own sovereign money without being, diluted or inflated or censored. Then I think a lot of things that are being held back right now, in terms of talent, in terms of potential, might explode. That's my utopian vision, is that Jamaica becomes a productive, explosion of productivity and talent. And people that probably, left Jamaica, we call it brain drain. They left Jamaica to go, have a better life somewhere, will realize that, oh, I can live in my hometown, in my home country, and still do great things with the tools that we have today. And there'll be kind of a big repatriation as well. I mean, these are all utopian visions, so don't think of it as, I might be being bombastic, but people coming home, people being productive, and us growing into this, very, very wealthy, bountiful country, just because we've freed the people to be able to actually work is kind of my utopian vision. Lots of hurdles in between here and there, but I think it's a good vision to keep working for.
I spoke with a handful of other people who have started using Bitcoin when I was working on the piece that I worked on a few months ago about Flash and your efforts. It seems like there has been some traction already. Well, there are people using it already. I don't think that sounds utopian. We're seeing repatriation in places like El Salvador, which we've talked about. Um, are you seeing anything that's sort of the early stages of what you're talking about? Are you working with any developers on the ground there, with any people who are benefiting from this technology directly? And to your point, so much so that they're not thinking like, how do I get out of here? It's more like, no, I could be okay because now I have sort of what I need to be productive and to be fruitful while still living here, as you put it, while still being home in my home country doing this work. Are you seeing any kind of early stages of that thus far?
I think my view, my aperture is a little bit smaller than I would like it to be. I'm sure there are people out there that are doing it, but my aperture is focused on a lot of my users and the merchants. And the merchants that I see, they are showing a lot of signs of that. Like a lot of merchants that are working there and getting revenue in Jamaican dollars are no longer thinking of how to get it out of Jamaican dollars or how to escape, the current jurisdiction. They're now thinking the opportunity is here, right? I can actually save here in Bitcoin and go back to Jamaican dollars whenever I want to. So those merchants now are no longer feeling reliant on foreign institutions or, foreign currency in order to keep their business running. And that is an amazing thing. It gives them a lot more freedom to build things that last on the ground. A lot of the short-term thinking was because of the, need for, foreign resources. And that isn't required anymore for a lot of the merchants. And they're slowly starting to realize that, I think. Now, granted, there's a lot of steps that still need to happen for this to become a normal thing, but a lot of the forward-thinking merchants are heading in that direction, and I think I see more of that every day, not just for Bitcoin, but for stablecoins, for digital assets, for ways that people can digitally transact and communicate. I think that all of that plays a part in the way merchants are changing the way they think and how to do business today. And I'm looking forward to that happening more and more, and because that's going to create more Flash merchants for us.
Yeah. That's amazing. There does seem to be a bit of a contagious effect. There's like people, they start using it, they feel the benefits of it, they teach a friend about it. I think on a certain level with any sort of new technology, there's some anxiety around it, but then just the fact that it sort of sticks around and just continues to be reliable, it's great. I'm just kind of thinking about you having given your home country such an amazing product. Um, is it? I think about this a lot, and I think about it as a non-developer. Do you feel any sense of like pressure to continue to make it really good, to make sure to keep up with it? Because it is such an amazing enabling thing that you're doing, but also does some of that pressure potentially get alleviated because it's open source, because there are other people that can look at the code that can help you out? What is it like playing the role that you're playing?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think last year, some of that pressure was realized mainly because we're at a point in the project where we're not necessarily getting a lot of reviews or stars or GitHub maybe stars or follows, and we're not getting those kind of needed reviews to do a lot of security audits or a lot of code reviews to check for bugs and contributions to documentation to functionality. We're not seeing that as much. You might get that in a wallet like Blink, or a wallet like Phoenix or others that are much more well known. But I think we need to get to the point where we're getting more independent reviews from Bitcoiners that love this kind of thing, and that would really help us out. So reach out to the community and see if that can happen. Another thing that was a little bit of a learning curve for us was also the usage of the tool. Like we started off, trying to use it in a much more cypherpunk way, like this is Bitcoin, and a lot of people couldn't understand it. So, we learned how to kind of tailor it so it's a lot more understandable, and realizing that education is needed alongside the actual app. So we're building a lot of that education out as well in terms of documentation, YouTube videos, and that kind of stuff. But I would say that those are some of the things that we needed to build out in terms to make sure that the app was usable in Jamaica. Yeah, I forgot what the rest of your question was.
No, that's it. No, I think it's great. I was just saying, like, what sorts of responsibility do you feel? Do you feel any pressure to make sure, obviously it's safe, usable, all these things. But I think that, it's interesting. I think a lot of people come at it with that sort of cypherpunk. This has to be cool and kind of almost edgy. But then you're like, look, we're just trying to make digital money that makes people's life better. We're making technology that people, generally speaking, want to use and want to use as easily as they use maybe like comparably to something like Cash App here in the United States. And I say this because I don't think it necessarily means that the spirit, the cypherpunk or like the Bitcoin spirit is inherently taken away if you're not approaching it with that edginess, because I think just the fact that you're enabling people and providing them with the opportunity that it does provide them just to have this app and what it facilitates for them, I think you're still keeping that spirit alive. You're just doing it in a more subtle way. You're not hitting people over the head with it saying, this is what I'm all about. But at the same time, they're feeling the benefits of what you're all about and what you're trying to do for them. Is that a fair way to put it? I don't know. I've been trying to refine this sort of perspective on Bitcoin myself, so maybe I'm just projecting here. I don't know.
No, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think I like to term it the trying to find the lowest common denominator customer and make sure that they are taken care of. There's a good friend that I have in Jamaica. That's his name is Mikey, and for Mikey to use the app, it can't be only for an iPhone 16. It has to be able to run on a phone that is commoditized or a low resource phone. And then Jamaica doesn't always have the best internet everywhere. So you can't just have a high bandwidth internet access to the phone. It has to be able to run offline part of the time or in a low bandwidth situation. And these are the kind of things that I say, okay, if we can get to that customer, even a customer who doesn't like to type that much, a lot of people in Jamaica and the Caribbean and Latin America, shit, everywhere except, sorry for the cursing, everywhere except the US almost uses WhatsApp. And when you use WhatsApp, a lot of people use voice notes. So we're getting to the point where as the app can be worked for people that want to use a voice note, to send a message instead of typing, then the app has that kind of accessibility controls in it. So imagine you're using the app, you're sending a Noster message and you tell the app, zap 100 sats to my friend Mikey. And the app converts that into an actual action that you can confirm and send the money to him. not techie at all, right? It's just a voice note you're sending at that point.
That's it.
And that's where we want to get to. We want to serve those kind of people. And that's really what drives me and makes me feel like, we're covering that gap. Yeah.
Amazing. It sounds, again, as a non-technical person, that sounds quite challenging, but super, super cool to think about. You actually also kind of beat me to my last question here is sort of what comes next. Any other things like that? I know that accessibility is really big for you. So if you want to touch on that a little bit, and then in terms of what comes next, obviously what comes next for Flash, and then just next steps for you, what's happening with Jamaica, the recovery effort, and then maybe ways that people might be able to still help if they want to.
Sure. So first, the what comes next for Flash? We're rolling out our new beta release soon. We still haven't fully launched. Like all of this has been happening in a pre-launch stage, and it's been amazing. Adoption. So we're going to be launching on Bitcoin Pizza Day, May 22nd. We have a lot of really cool surprises that I can't tell you on this podcast, but I really want to. I'll probably tell you offline. But just know that you're gonna have a lot of really cool, exciting things that people all around the world can participate in as part of our launch. And then we're gonna be also having a lot of new rollout features. A lot more Noster stuff. We're gonna have additional features for Jamaicans to access the international markets. As a finance basically, not investment, but just buying things and being able to use international bank accounts. So we have that rolling out, and then on the Hurricane Melissa stage, like I said, we're still sending buses over to the west of the island. But most importantly, once we have our final set of solar panel generators land in Jamaica and get cleared, we're going to be going to different community centers and donating those to the community center. Now, granted, the community centers have already probably gotten their internet back up, gotten their electricity back up, and they're running again. But these are the places that are going to be the center for the next disaster that happens, right? So we want to make sure that before the next disaster happens, we have them up and running with internet that can work without, needing the grid, electricity that can work without needing the grid, and then finally, Bitcoin that can work without needing the grid. So if we can set them up with those three things, a node, Starlink or something, and the solar panels, then we're going to have these really resilient nodes around the country that can withstand the next disaster. That is the goal.
So you're actually thinking in terms of this, like resilience by like a disaster standard. That's sort of your, how can I say, like your baseline almost at this point. I don't know if that's the best word to use, but is that like,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like the table stakes. The baseline is if we're setting you up with a node and you are going to be one of we call it Project Island Resilience. And we're setting you up with one of these nodes. This node is going to have internet power and the way to actually send either communication via Noster or a payment via Bitcoin. And that, will be, of course, checked every now and again. We were looking into different ways that we could do offline payments as well. So I'm not really sure which protocol we'll use, and we're kind of experimenting with that right now. But that'll be part of it as well. As merchants around the area will need to still transact, right? So you might have
yeah.
a mint in the node. A lot of that's, technical. But the point is, it's a resilience node that we'll have around the island. And if you are in a disaster zone, that should be the place you go to and get what you need without, having to wait for help or wait for recovery.
Wow, that's amazing. In terms of creating these hubs, how is it all just organic? Is it just again that coordination amongst different groups that you mentioned in the beginning of this conversation? Is it all just happening, or is there some level of like federal government involved with this, or is this all just basically grassroots efforts between different people working together on this right now?
It's all grassroots at this point. We haven't even approached any of the federal or other institutions. And I think it's a good idea for us to do it. But I think that it would be much better to actually like lay a kind of proof of concept, a foundation that works, and then go to them with this proof of concept saying, hey, this works. So at the federal level, if you guys are interested in rolling this out, we have a method that works. We have the knowledge to volunteer and give to you. Let's do it together. And I hope that happens because Jamaica is really known for adopting things well if they work and going viral with it. So if Jamaica adopts this, we could see at a federal level this happening all over the country and all the region. But I am always the utopian. So at a bare minimum, we're gonna have 10, community centers that will be donated with solar panels and Bitcoin nodes, and then we'll take it from there.
Bananas, absolutely amazing. That's yeah, maybe bananas isn't the best word, but I'm just like kind of blown away that I didn't know this was all happening. But it's just it's really, really amazing to see because I think oftentimes with relief efforts, from my limited understanding of being involved with them, there's a lot of like, okay, let's repair things and get things to like a state where it's like, okay, everything's good enough and now we can get back to our daily lives. But there's a level of proactivity here of preparing, knowing that this is going to happen again. But using this technology on that level, I haven't heard of anybody else doing that, at least not to this extent. And also, I think combining these different elements that you're talking about, it just seems like an absolutely amazing, yeah, it's just an absolutely incredible effort. So I commend you for it. Very much appreciate you sharing it here. Where can people follow not only you but the effort? Are you documenting this anywhere that they can sort of maybe follow along or continue to get more information about it?
I probably should. I've been so heads down that the documentation part has always fallen to the wayside. So I'm happy I'm doing podcasts like this, and I'm probably going to start writing some articles too. But if you want to follow what we're doing in general, you can follow us on Twitter. It is Get Flat or LN Flash on Twitter. On Instagram, it is getflash.io. It's getflash.io on most social media, and you can go to the website and see all the social media links there. And then we're also on Noster as Flash, so definitely follow us on Noster. But the open source community knows a lot of our team and knows us. And I have to shout out to the open source community. Like, people who are building on Fedimint, people who are building on Cashew, people who are building on stablecoins even. A lot of the open source stuff anyway. A lot of that stuff has really helped us to maintain velocity, like to maintain the velocity of innovation that is needed for countries like ours and countries that are in conflict zones and countries that are in consistent disaster zones to get the resources they need. Like, this is the change in the world that we need to see so that we can move at the speed of technology. The people that need electricity in Africa that are getting, expanded electricity from companies like Gridless.
Great.
These things are needed and we're going to keep building it. And I'm really happy to be a part of that. And I thank the open source community that I'm working with and the human rights community that I'm working with that helps with everything that we're doing. So if you want to reach out to me directly, I am Dread also on everything. Well, not on Instagram, but on Twitter and
But
Noster, and you can.
aren't you pole vault? I'm spacing out. Pole vault hero. I forget it.
It's Pole Valdrian.
There it
Well,
is. Pole Dream. Yeah,
like
yeah.
what do you call it? The name on it just says Dread. But
Okay.
if you type in Pole Valdrian, you'll see Dread, and check out what I'm doing and what we're doing. We always meme and crap post on Twitter whenever we have the chance. Yeah.
Yeah, and for those who are unaware, Dredd is a pole vault champion. It's like I don't know the easiest way to say. We have the picture behind him there. We didn't get into this today, but competed
That's
in
my passion.
national game. Yeah, I was gonna say maybe a quick before we go there, just maybe a quick overview of your pole vault skills.
Yeah, I competed for Jamaica from high school all the way up to professional. I tried out for the Olympics twice and competed at every other level down. Won a couple medals, and I guess the biggest achievement is that I held the national record for Jamaica in the pole vault for 11 years running, and then coached the guy that ended up breaking my record after it was over. So I coached as well after my heyday, but it's been a passion for me, and I still follow it. And hopefully one day I'll be coaching my son as well on how to pole vault. So
Amazing.
go pole vault.
I hope. Yeah, thank you for taking the time to do this, Dredd. I know you're busy. I hope everybody listening just gets how awesome the work that Dredd is doing. It's really, really amazing stuff, and I think it's a true testament to not just cypherpunk culture or whatever, but just you can just do things and you can use this technology to do such incredible good in the world and tell people about that. We oftentimes we're hearing about a lot of the financialization of Bitcoin and all this other stuff, which is fine, to each their own. Everybody can do their thing. But, using Bitcoin, freedom tech, what's now becoming emergency tech, as we were saying, it's truly changing lives. It's making stuff better for the next time things go wrong. That a place like Jamaica experiences severe hurricanes, and this narrative does not get out there enough. And the only thing I think that's significantly harder than spreading this narrative is being the person building the technology that underpins it all, and that's actually creating this technology and making it usable for people. So, Dredd, many thanks for the work that you do. You're an incredible inspiration, and thank you again for taking the time to jump on here with me and talk about this stuff.
Thank you, Frank. One love, and I hope to see you soon.
Absolutely, my friend. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. We will talk soon. Take it easy.